All right, we're live. Happy 4th of July, everyone. You're hanging out with my community manager, the community built for, built by, and managed by community managers. As always, you can chat along with us over on Twitter at hashtag CMGR Hangout, where I know some of you are watching right now. If you love what you're seeing today, have a great idea for a topic, or want to join us live, go ahead over to mycmgr.com, our website, and click on Participate. So open source communities such as Drupal, Joomla, OwnCloud, KDE, and TYPO3 have grown enormously during the past year and encounter the same problems pertaining to governance and communication. Holly Ross from the Drupal Association mentions in her article, Defining Our Roles in the Drupal Community, that for the last couple of years, Drupal Association staff have been dancing an uncomfortable dance within the community where no one quite knows who's supposed to be leading. So we often discuss ways to grow your community, but when communities grow, big things might get out of control, and governance needs to be reevaluated to fit this growth. So today we discuss how governance and communication change with growth. I'm really excited about that. Shout out to Gary Keenan, who's helping us over on Twitter with the chat. And I guess we'll just kick things off with Sherry. Introduce yourself, and we'll go down the line.
Awesome. Hey everyone, happy Friday. I am Sherry and I co-produce CMGR Hangout here with Brew, as well as lead community and user experience at a company called Rebellion Media. Ruth?
Hello, my name is Ruth Cheesley. I'm part of the Joomla community leadership team and CEO of a company called Viria Group. And I mainly get involved with the user groups and generally helping with the community and marketing of the project.
Awesome, thank you, Ruth. Joss?
Hey, my name is Jos Portvliet. I'm currently community manager for OwnCloud, also active in the KDE community, and I was community manager for the OpenSUSE community at SUSE. And I live in Berlin.
Awesome, thanks for joining us today. David?
Hi, my name is David Hurley, and I'm in the US. I'm the community manager for Joomla. I'm also a member of the production leadership team, and I work a lot with the code base and the development base.
Very cool, thank you. And Christian?
Yeah, I'm Christian Miller from the TYPO3 community, and I'm part of the newly created community working group, and I mostly cater for our developers and adding new contributors to our teams.
Awesome,
Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Ben? You're muted. There you go.
All right. Hey, hey folks. So last but not least, I'm a community manager for TYPO3 and also together with Christian, member of our newly started community working group, which is kind of part of this conversation. And I'm from the Netherlands, just like my friend Jos.
Very cool. We have a pretty big range of countries here represented today. That's awesome. Very nice. All right. Well, Ben actually came up with this topic, I think, with several of you, and generated the question. So I'll let him clarify if you guys have questions about the questions. But just to kind of kick us off here, question number one is, what pain points have you experienced during community growth?
All right. So I thought the article that Holly Ross wrote about the tension that we have in open source communities anyway between the associations or foundations and between the community that's doing the actual coding and the programming. This is something that I've seen in our community and exactly also the Drupal and the Joomla community. Probably Jos can also tell a few stories about that. And when the communities start to grow, the commercial interests or the company interests get bigger, and we cannot only do our work from scratching our own itch. You know, what's the original motto for working in an open source community? Jos, you want to add something to that maybe?
Yeah, I mean, this gets really complicated, right? I mean, everybody. I mean, you see this even in communities, by the way, that have no big companies involved. I mean, in KDE you had certain conflicts there too. For example, what I noticed in KDE is that you seem to have a little bit of a trouble with balancing. Like, you know, on one hand you have people who scratch their own itch, just want to have fun and are just playing. I have, for example, students, and in the code that they write, you can basically see what classes they're following at university, you know? I mean, ooh, last week I learned about model view controller. Let's rewrite this piece of code to use it. Now, that's really cool, but it leads to this, well, as my colleague at OwnCloud said, Frank Karliczek, in a conversation about this a while ago, he said, the result of this is that people tend to over-engineer things in these communities, right? Just because you can. I mean, you need to build a house. Well, let's build a skyscraper, hack off the top, and hey, we've got a house. And this is something that, well, for some other people in the community who want to create like the best solutions for the users or the consumers or customers, and that's also the case, obviously, for companies, this creates a conflict. And obviously, when a company is involved, this is a lot, well, stronger, this effect. I mean, a company also has a lot more resources, so they have a tendency to steamroll over the volunteers. And that's something that, well, I mean, at SUSE, obviously, we struggled with that, because SUSE has literally hundreds of engineers working on OpenSUSE, the community. And that has quite a tendency to steamroll over what people do if you don't really work very hard at preventing that from happening. And it's the same at OwnCloud. So this is definitely a challenge.
So I'll speak from the Joomla standpoint on that point. Because Joomla doesn't have any of that commercial backing, it's a different kind of look at the same situation when we talk about experiencing pain in community growth and what the pain points might be. For us, what we've seen have been that those pain points tend to revolve around how to continue to encourage new people to join without them feeling that sense of, how do I get involved and where do I start? Because there's so many different things going on. Where do I actually fit in, and do I matter as a single contributor, as a single volunteer? So one of the pain points we've seen is how do we continue to encourage new volunteers and make them feel at home immediately when they step into the project. A second pain point that I think we see, at least again in Joomla, is a little bit of a separation of interests. We have two different types of people, and I blogged about this just the other day, so it's maybe possible we could push the link to it later, between the discussers and the doers. And we have those people that are really, they find their enjoyment and their satisfaction in actually being able to create something, in being able to build it and then release it to everyone. And then you've got that other group of users that they're more the discussers. They appreciate being able to talk out the potential for problems and analyze the situation fully. And those groups tend to separate more and more. And if there's not a good balance between them, then the community as a whole really begins to suffer and struggle, because it has to be a balance between active progress moving forward as well as being able to thoughtfully make those changes.
I think we are in a similar situation in the TYPO3 community. We also have different groups that are working in different modes, actually. We have the discussers and the doers as well, but that's not so strong a separation. But we have kind of like old-fashioned people and modernizers, and that's also kind of a clash, because the ones want to go forward, and the other ones want to keep it like it is and improve what we have. And I mean, that's also usually a thing that will clash. The bigger the community, the more you have those separations and groups. And also we absolutely have the same problem that with increasing size, new people have difficulties to find their spot. First of all, to contact the right people to get into something, and then to find their place in the community or in the circle of people doing stuff. because they know each other for some time, for a longer time usually, and they all have their specialties and they know each other, and it's very hard for a new person to get into this cultural thing that you come from the outside and no one knows you, and yeah, that's really a challenge to keep it open to newcomers, which we need.
Yeah, I think associated with what Christian and David have just been saying is the fact that when our project started out, there was a vision and there was an idea and there was a structure set up to make that happen, to make that a reality. And as communities grow and as projects grow, often to levels that may never even have been envisaged when they started, the structure that was set up initially and the leadership systems that were set up initially and the way things were done initially aren't necessarily appropriate when your project's being used by millions of people around the world who have very different opinions on how things should be done, how leadership should work, and lots of cultures coming together within the project. So that's definitely something that I think is probably a pain point that we've all experienced at some point in the past and even now.
Yeah, Emma on Twitter actually was joining in to say that she is not actually part of a developer community, but she was saying that a lot of these challenges are similar to their communities as well, so it's not even necessarily developer or open source unique, but it's a pain point in growth and community growth for sure. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Or are we good to go? All right, let's move on. So question 2 is, what is the role of governance in your community? Ben, do you want to kick us off again?
Yeah, sure. But this is also a thing that's subject to change. So I also see that when stakes get higher, you also see that governance kinds of changes. So in the beginning, when the community is small, governance is quite easy. I mean, this would be a team leader or several team leaders. And what we see in our community, that governance is also kind of changing. At least in our case, to the association that used to have more a role, of distributing the finances or the budgets, which was not so much involved in creating a governance role. So actually, we are kind of on the road, in where the association is also trying to determine what actually are the demands and try to govern this in a kind of way, by setting some kind of a guidelines for the teams and stuff like this. So we really have to see how. And Jos also mentioned earlier the steamrolling, and this is something which I see that we really in our community need to prevent. And we see a lot of goodwill. Okay, guys, we have been kind of standing still for some time, and now we need to move on. And everyone's very enthusiastic and wants to climb up on top of the steamroller. And this is something that from a community perspective, at least for me personally as a community manager, I would really like to see balanced out in the beginning already, instead of first steamrolling and then picking up the casualties. So we'll have to see where that ends up.
I guess it's hard to do it right from the beginning, because you never know where your community is going, and if you start small, you have limitations on the amount of governance you can actually have, and the amount that makes sense. And then I think the good advice can only be to be on the lookout for community grow and adapt as fast as possible. Maybe even have some backup plans for, oh no, we are steamrolling into a huge direction, we should do something. I have some ideas prepared for that case. I don't know, might make sense for new communities.
Yeah, concerning that, I would say that what we discussed a couple of times, really having the short iterations like with Scrum and having retrospectives pretty early on, that makes a lot of sense.
I'm hearing a common theme, which I think we'd probably all agree to, and that's that we have to be willing and ready to make change as we see that change become necessary, especially in the regards to governance. And that is a very difficult situation because, like you mentioned earlier, there's always going to be those people that don't want change. They're very comfortable, and anything that implies a change, they take as a negative connotation. So it's important early on to demonstrate that yes, changes are going to be made, and nothing's permanent. We can always roll back a change if there's a major problem, but we're making these changes so that we can continue to have a governance that actually supports the overall project.
I think it's also good to try and make sure that governance doesn't get too far behind, on the changes. I mean, I know, for example, in a lot of communities I've been involved with, the moment when finally a process was set up to deal with people who misbehaved was after it had basically exploded several times. And it's not a fun thing to have to set up, but it's better to do it ahead of problems than after, because these things can do a lot of damage. And that's obviously just one example, but a very typical one, and you see this in a lot of things. I mean, I see like the 3 communities I've been involved with or are involved in, OpenSUSE, KDE, and OwnCloud. I see really big differences there, and I think it's not just the size that dictates the kind of governance you need, but also the age. More like a combination of the two, I think, because, for example, OwnCloud is very big. I mean, we have about, 1.7 million users. It's a number that we're currently officially giving, and it's probably pretty good. Well, minimum, actually a rather conservative guess. And we have a couple of hundred people involved in development alone. So that's a pretty big community already. It's one of the larger ones, I think, in free software. But it's only 4 years old as a project. I mean, it's just been growing like insane. So there's actually very little governance, and that's working quite fine. I mean, I'm actually almost surprised, because if I see an OpenSUSE, which is actually roughly same size, depending on what metric you look at, there's quite a bit more governance, and honestly, it's necessary. So, I don't know, it probably also simply depends on the kind of community culture you have. And like OwnCloud has an advantage, I think, that it has a pretty good idea of what it wants, because its founder, Frank, basically set out a pretty clear vision at the beginning and is keeping a pretty strong eye on it. A little bit, Linus Torvald, Linux kernel style, benevolent dictator-ish. I mean, he's a soft dictator, but he definitely, says no to certain things. That's also why, for example, the design of OwnCloud is very well done. I mean, you need to be able to say no to, let's add an option here and a feature there and a little thingy there. And the other 2 communities I'm involved with, OpenSUSE and KDE, they don't really have much of a central vision. And I think that increases the chance of clashes and disagreements, because if you don't have a clear direction, the kind of people who come in, I think, tend to have a lot more diverse goals and a lot more diverse ideas about how things should work. And that obviously leads to a little more potential for conflict. So you need a little more, way of dealing with that. Doesn't mean I'm not trying to introduce those things that deal with conflicts in OwnCloud too, right? I proposed a community working group there as well, because I just think it's, better have it than, let's say better have it and not need it than need it and not have it, But yeah, I think there are a lot of factors that actually are important for seeing how much governance and what kind of governance is needed. I think it's a lot more complicated than just size and growth.
All right, good points for sure. Let's go ahead and move on to question 3. Success of a project depends on strong, sustained leadership. So how do you execute this in your community?
Well, speaking from the perspective of Joomla and what we've done there, we've actually had some really good learning experiences. We started with a small team of developers, and as we grew, we wanted to make sure that we we're sustainable long term, because eventually developers are going to move on or find other areas of interest, or maybe just not have the time for the project. So we've been implementing larger and larger working group setups, so we have more people doing more tasks as opposed to a small group doing everything. So the diversity of our leadership teams actually helps us quite a bit, and dispersing the tasks among a wider range of users. And the other thing that we actually have seen lately to be something we want to be doing more of is actually encouraging a kind of a shadowing of each position, so that we have an assistant or a second that's ready to be able to step in and take the lead should something happen in a case where that first role person is unavailable or steps away from the project. Someone else has already been trained on that exact specific task list and can step into those shoes. And that's something that like I said, we're just starting to get into figuring out how that's going to be done and how we structure that best. But I think long term, what we're doing really is reducing that bust factor, right? We don't want it to be everything held by a single individual and all knowledge being controlled by a single point. If we can spread that out across the community, I mean, that's really the whole point of having such a large community. We can take advantage of a very large user base of volunteers that are interested in helping. So the success of a project and how it relates to the leadership, I think, depends on making sure that that strong leadership is spread out across the users.
Interesting. I think in the Type3 community we're kind of struggling with this leadership in the teams, and I think the tendency currently is to spread it over the team, and then we still have such a free-thinking community, so to speak, that one central leadership is how would you call this, kind of not accepted until now. Yeah, maybe you can say something about it, Christian, because you're in one of the core teams.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it depends. I'm not even sure if the question in that way is totally perfect, because strong, sustained leadership sounds to me like Linus Torvalds, which of course works for the Linux kernel, but I don't think it's the only way to have a successful project. It very much depends on the culture of the project and also the people in the project. I guess you can have a shared leadership in some way, and maybe not even a strong leadership, as long as the people know where to go. I mean, the vision is probably more the important part. That might be a vision shared or a vision by a single person, and I guess depending on that you will get either one strong leader or a group of people that share leadership in some way. Yeah, as you said, Ben, for us it's at the moment, I mean, we don't have that one strong leader, and it differs between the teams. Some teams can work with that, they share leadership and it works pretty well. Other teams are still struggling to find their vision and the direction to go from to. So it depends. I guess you don't need this one strong leader for a successful project. That's my personal opinion.
So I guess kind of tying in there is question 4 as well, and I'll just throw this in the mix. If you still have something to say about 3, feel free. But also, when we're talking about leadership, what role does your association play?
Yeah, like it's like I said, our association is kind of redefining the role of leadership, and our association was once started just as a central body, you know, to manage the finances, how membership fees come in and how budgets are distributed, and they are now really looking, you know, also under the pressure of one aging system, and we are currently like we turn into one product community into a community of like 3 products. So we also have quite some new products, and there's a big demand from the outside. I wouldn't even say, I mean, everyone's part of the community, but this is typically your companies that kind of demand this leadership from the association. So this is in our case kind of changing, and we'll really have to see what we're currently doing. It's quite interesting actually. So what we in a hangout that we had today with the marketing team, we mentioned, like we do so many things for the community itself, like from the very beginning. Like I think the Type3 community is a very old community, and in the beginning we did these snowboard tours where all the community members get together, and I think now we have like 15 Type3 camps, which are also very community oriented. And now we started a few of those meetings with the companies, and this is really some kind of a first. So one of the meetings that we had like 2 days ago, that really sounded very good, and we'll have to see how we can balance that out. What actually is the role of our product, in for some of the companies, because some of the companies, it's really their livelihood and they make a lot of money, or they have a lot of turnover from this open source project. So their opinion and their involvement in the product, the project, the community, as you will, is quite important. It has not been recognized until now. So this is something, what a role that the association starts to play. And I would say that is typically a role of the association, because it usually consists of more company owners than the teams consist of, I would say.
Yeah, with different people, different skills, right? I mean, this is like, well, I mean, dealing our engineers among each other is simply a different crowd than, well, business people, let me put it that way. So I think it makes sense that you have, and probably this also shifts over time. I think as a community, you need to think about the skills you need to have on the board, and then pick those people on the board. And while it's very nice if the board is representative of the development community or even the wider community, that might not always be the smartest thing, simply because you might simply not need the skills of a developer on the board. Especially, I mean, this is very different between communities. I don't know how it is at Joomla and TYPO3, but the communities I'm involved in, at least in KDE and OpenSUSE, the board very explicitly stays away from development decisions. Yeah. So actually, technical skills on the board are bordering on useless. So, yeah, obviously this is different between different communities, but...
Sure, I mean, in the Joomla community, we've changed leadership structures over the years. So we've gone from one flat leadership structure, and now we have open source matters, and we have the production leadership team and the community leadership team. And one of the benefits I see of that is that I'm not a coder. I know enough to break code, but I don't write code, and I'm no good at leading people who code because I don't speak that language. I'm really enthusiastic and keen and passionate about the community, and I have skills to be able to lead in that area. And so allowing people to lead because they're good at leading, and not as you've done a really good job, here become a leader, without any leadership skills, but also allowing them to lead in an area that they are passionate about, that allows them to keep alive their inspiration, to kind of be in contact with why they want to be involved in the project, is really, really important in sustaining people. Because then when you do have those difficult questions and the difficult issues that come up, it's much easier to stick with it if you have that inspiration alive, in my experience anyway.
Although I wouldn't underestimate the directions that technical people can take. I mean, there are a couple of people who started out as programmers and then went on to found and lead, companies like Google and Facebook and Microsoft. So, I don't want to say that you shouldn't put a developer on the board, because I think, we know a couple of pretty okay examples in terms of how that turned out. So, sometimes people say, like, developers are not good leaders, but that's absolute nonsense. Most developers are pretty smart people, and smart people usually can change and learn and do a lot of different things.
And it's good to have a range as well, to have people from different areas with different interests and with different skills, rather than just everyone with the same interests, the same personality types. that can create conflict in itself.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Oh, I wanted to say basically the same, because I also think it depends very much on the idea for the association or the board or whatever you have, what functionality they have, and then finding people that are interested in pushing that forward and not looking at what those people are. I mean, if they are business people or engineers, I wouldn't care as long as they are interested in doing the job and they have ideas how to push it forward. That's I think the main thing for it.
Yeah, I think both business people and developers are pretty important in the open source world, because you have the people that are ultimately using the product to sell to clients and making money off it, so the product continues to be used at the same time as the developers who are making the magic happen. So that's just been my observation from the Magento community.
Right, totally, yes.
All right, let's transition into question 5 here, which is, how should we handle complaints and conflict effectively while still giving people a voice, being transparent, and bringing resolution and satisfactory outcomes? And you cannot answer with a magic wand.
Okay, let me start with unicorns, if we don't have the magic wand. So I'll start, I guess. One of the things that I try to stress a lot when I'm talking with people is that you're never always going to have unanimous consent. Okay, you might occasionally have unanimous, but for the most part, there's going to be differences of opinions because we all have different experiences and different backgrounds. So as a result, there's always going to be some level of discussion or debate that goes on anytime you're making decisions and as you're making progress. So the ability to listen really becomes critical to the conflict resolution process. I had talked with a lot of different people, and in Joomla we have such a wide community, and sometimes little things such as a language difference or a difference in opinion based on culture can make such a massive difference in how a question or how a debate is kind of processed and perceived. So when we're trying to handle those differences of opinions and those conflicts in the community, it becomes really, really important to be able to listen and actually hear not just what they're saying, but the background, the stuff, the unspoken part of what they're saying and why they feel the way they do about it. Oftentimes, you can very easily diffuse a situation by listening instead of just by speaking up and sharing why someone's wrong and why you're better. So usually that doesn't always have to happen in a public setting either, and so that's where the balance with transparency comes into place, because just because a conversation doesn't happen on Twitter or on Facebook doesn't mean that it's not an open and transparent conversation. And just because you have a conversation with someone doesn't mean that it needs to be some discussion for everyone. It can very easily be something where you want to talk with someone on the side, maybe to hear more of what they think, or maybe to kind of share with them why you think that they may not fully understand the situation. And that doesn't need to be something that's done in a public environment. And that by no means puts a damper on transparency within the project as a whole. So it is a balancing act. It is a bit of a tricky situation because you do want to be open with everything. You do want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, but at the same time you want to make sure that it's handled fairly.
Yeah. One of the things that I see is that a lot of complaints and conflicts are also due to a lack of appreciation, and I think I'm currently in our community kind of in the mode of trying to distribute that kind of appreciation, and that appreciation also goes along, with really giving the listening ear, like you were saying. So we also decided this year, and that's together with Christian and a few other people, and that's also what Jos also mentioned, to start a community working group. And I've also seen, I think, during the past few years that there are these discussions, going on Twitter, and sometimes they kind of end somewhere, but they don't have an end. So, and this is something that we try to solve by by having the community working group. I must say that it's pretty new, so it's not just like, okay, now we start and everybody can come to us, but we definitely notice that the more we kind of advertise that we are there for people to listen to them, the more important this position also becomes. So I also would say that, yeah, one very difficult thing is being transparent. I would always like to stress that we need a radical transparency, but of course we also need to take care what we are transparent about. But I think we, at least looking at our own project, I think we can never be transparent enough. I guess you guys have the same experience.
So I know I'm going to speak twice, but you said something that was really important. As a community manager, you know, one of the things that I will lay awake at night is watching social media and seeing a conversation begin to form and a discussion or an argument start to take place, and having to weigh out at what point is it my duty as a community manager to jump into this. And some of them you don't want to. Some of them it's better to let the community discuss it among themselves, and as long as it doesn't become a negative or a potentially personal attack, then it might not be the best situation for me as a community manager to actually step into. So it is a difficult job of trying to discern when is it appropriate for me to step in as a community manager and do something else about the situation.
Well, and I think you made an important part there, pointing out the personal attacks, because those are like a huge difference in the conversation. Like, it's okay if you don't agree with everything that everyone is saying, but once you get that personal attack element in there, all maturity goes to the wind.
Yeah, but also if it gets personal, I mean, I think it's perfectly fine to get it away from the public stage and reduce the amount of transparency, because at that point it's really personal, and in that regard it's a personal discussion, and you should get it away and into I mean 4 eyes discussions, or maybe 6 eyes with some mediator in between, and then sort it all out. I guess that's the best way, and I don't feel that it's transparent, but just preventing major issues in the community, more or less.
Yeah, but I want to add to that I do think it is important that other people see how the conflict is being dealt with. So while, you know, I think the point is clear, right? I mean, yeah, you should try to keep it private, but other people should see what's going on, basically, because that influences them and their behavior in the future. I mean, if people are misbehaving in public, then it's not always nice to slap them in public, but sometimes it is the right thing to do, because then other people see, hey, this is not okay, which deters them from doing the same thing.
Lisa chimed in on Twitter to say something similar. It's just that, like, if the conversation started on public, it's nice to bring the resolution back to the public. Even if it's not resolved in the public, you can still state kind of what happened there and wrap it up.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, and even just say, like the 2 people that had a discussion here had a private chat, and now they resolved their personal issues. Even that statement is enough to say, okay, look, that's the way how to solve it. If you have a personal problem with someone, just solve it privately. Let everyone know that it's solved and that you can go on working together, basically. But generally, I think what is very clear here is that a community of a certain size needs people that are respected and known, and that also know their community, that can step in to such discussions, because you cannot be deeply involved yourself, otherwise you won't have the respect and the option to actually speak up. So I guess that's the part of the community manager, really the deep part of the community manager, to step in and say, hey, I'm here, I'm the one you can trust, everyone can trust me, I'm open to all opinions, and let's sort it out together.
That's really hard too, right? Because especially if it's something that you personally are passionate about, you want so badly to be able to jump in and give your 2 cents, because hey, you have a voice too. But you're absolutely right. As a community manager, sometimes your best role is the quiet, the silent role. right? The one that doesn't give an opinion on a situation, even when you have a good one, but instead being willing just to listen and let it flow without your voice.
Yeah, I'm not terribly good at that. I often actually I'm quite fond of having something like a community working group or a board or something with multiple people on it to take care of these things. Let moderators take care of it on the forums, let moderators take care of it on the mailing list. I personally, I don't want to be policing the community. I know that's a bit of a hard term, but that's not my role. I'll help resolve conflicts, absolutely, and I think people trust me just fine. But I mean, this is probably also a very personal thing. You know, I don't think I should be the one to fix these things all the time, everywhere. I mean, if only because, you know, I sleep at least 8 hours a night. Well, I try. So, you know, I can't always be there. And no, I'd rather try to care about, you know, the culture and the process and, you know, the governance, maybe even, than to deal with everything, you know, directly in person, because, well, it doesn't scale. And honestly, I'm not always the right person for that. Simple as that.
I think one thing we can all bring as leaders, though, is to exemplify the behaviour that we want to see in the community. So exemplify the way that we deal with conflict, because people do learn from example. And if our leaders are setting that example, then that gives people an impression of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. But it also allows people to see how difficult situations could be managed. They don't have to turn into this massive Twitter flame war. You know, you can take a step back, calm things down, have a conversation, and bring it to a resolution where everybody feels heard, nobody's been offended, everyone's had a chance to have their voice heard. So I guess what I'm saying is that's almost like a responsibility of the leadership of our project, but it's a very difficult thing to do, and we're not all going to get it right. So when we do get it wrong, you know, we need to have the confidence to say, well, that maybe I could have handled that better. Here's what I've learned from it, and here's what we're going to do about it.
Yeah, sometimes you have to say, look, do as I say, not as I do, because I'm not perfectly right. And be able to say sorry.
Yeah, absolutely, and say sorry, yeah.
I think we all had. Yeah, true.
Awesome. All right. So question 6 is, how can we build bridges between our communities and kind of leverage them to work together?
Yeah, I think that's a nice point. Actually, being here is already a good one. I really personally really tend to contact a lot of other communities, and when I see something going on, like what Holly wrote about the problems they were facing in their community, I just get on Skype and get in contact. So that's really great. There's one recent initiative which is purely CMS oriented, which is called CMS Garden. I think Ruth also knows it. She was also there, which is really a crazy initiative, only focused on open source cooperation and on open source communities. And so this is only on the content management in the content management area, but for the people involved there, it's so successful, so to speak. It's not successful on a commercial level or whatever, but it's for the community feeling. It's very interesting, very successful, and the guys are already thinking, or there's been some talk about getting this up to a higher level, to an open source garden. So those are some of the very practical things that I've already witnessed to build this better bridges. And there are a lot of conferences too, you know, where especially like the Community Leadership Summit coming up in Portland in 2 weeks. That's something that is most awesome, I think, to go to connect to other communities. So those are some of the things that I like.
I find this an interesting subject. I mean, I always try to indeed work with other communities as well, but it's mostly relevant, of course, with communities where you have something in common, right? Like the CMS garden. With OpenSUSE, I always encourage people, to collaborate with other Linux distributions, like at events to share indeed booths. And I mean, we've been doing that for years, and I think that's really cool. That's more the practical stuff. I mean, when it comes to more high-level things, well, I mean, yeah, actually, in KDE, we did, of course, together with GNOME, a couple of events. So, yeah, I think this is really, I mean, it's, especially in the open source world, right? I mean, we're all trying to stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, working together is one of the things that sets us apart, I think, from the proprietary world in general. So it's absolutely, I think for most people it's almost a natural thing. Most people will collaborate and work with others. I mean, that's what you do within the community, and it's quite natural to do that with other communities as well.
I think it's also important to know that there are other projects that you can reach out to and ask. For example, if you know a project has been through a particular challenging situation that you're now facing, then you can reach out to them and say, how did you deal with it? What went wrong? What didn't go wrong? But actually having those connections between the projects, whether it's the same type of project or different open source communities completely, actually having the communication channels open, that takes people-to-people communication. So it takes getting out there and talking to people and finding out what your similarities are, what your differences are, how you can help each other, not being kind of defensive about, well, this is what I do, I'm a content management system, so why would I want to know about Linux? So, there's so many different transferable skills that we all have, and we can really learn from each other's experiences and maybe even not repeat mistakes that other projects have made, learn from what they've learned from, and the community ultimately benefits from that. If you're not going to go through a process that's going to end in a difficult place.
I wanted to jump backwards just a minute here. Ron actually was asking a question. Let me see if I can pull it back up. I lost him. Here we go. Okay, so Ron was saying, you guys were mentioning how you wanted to kind of stay out of the policing element, but he was asking who you have then in that role when it is time to, when policing is required. Whose responsibility is it?
This is the thing that I said earlier, you need to figure out before it happens. Because I've been in a few situations where that was the thing that was unclear, and that's just massively wrong. I mean, I don't say there's one rule for that, honestly. It can be the board or not explicitly the board, like a community working group, or indeed the community manager. I mean, that's fine, as long as it's clear, obviously. I mean, I think there's quite a difference between a big conflict and just a small disagreement or misbehavior on a mailing list. I mean, you have different mechanisms there. A small misbehavior, disagreement, usually, depending on the communication channel, but usually you have moderators that take care of it, right, on IRC, mailing list, forums. And they're like the first line of defense, and I think 99% of the stuff can and should be called by them. And that's certainly something, a single community manager can't do, shouldn't try to do. I think you should really try to work with other people and have them, help out with this. Yeah. Of course, when things escalate, I think at the very least as community manager, well, you usually have skills and experience in the area of dealing with people. I mean, and that's obviously something you should use. So yeah, when things escalate, I usually play a mediating role. But at least in OpenSUSE, when I was involved there, it was the board who formally had the position of saying, okay, you know, this person has to leave or something like that. I didn't have that, and now we haven't actually figured that out on OwnCloud at the moment. But honestly, I'd rather not be in that position. I think this is something, you know, a group of people who are elected should take care of. Obviously, when you're elected as community manager, it's a different thing. But I've always been in a role where a company interacting with a community hired me. So I'm not chosen by the community, and I just shouldn't be the guy who says, you know, you're out. I mean, that makes no sense, I think. I can help, but yeah.
This would be actually where the community working group would have a very good role, and also have a trust basis, because that's it's not dependent on one individual deciding stuff. So
I'd take that even one step further, and I agree. I don't think you want it to be a one-person role, and maybe even, yes, that community working group or that community oversight would be helpful and beneficial. But if you can nurture a community of mutual respect, then everyone is empowered, and then anyone can actually go to anyone else, and with mutual respect, be able to say, you know, I think this might have been a bit over the line, or maybe this was carried a bit too far, and suddenly you've empowered an entire community to be able to fill that role.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, because then you're kind of also touching on implementing this kind of culture in your community, which I find is sometimes pretty difficult. You know, even when you have a code of conduct, how do you get everyone aligned on that?
Yeah, I think that's basically what David said. It works, but only up to a point. I mean, there's going to be a moment when people are just so stubbornly misbehaving, or just
they're so passionate, right? That's the word we want to use. They're so
exactly.
passionate
I mean, that's
about
how
what
it starts, right? Too much energy sometimes.
Yeah, and there is always going to be that time, and I think at that point, then those individuals need to be the ones that are respected by the community, that are understood to be someone that is going to be looking out not just for a single interest, but is actually looking at possibly the good of the entire project, and be understood by both sides, kind of a mediator in that sense, and be willing to be able to step in and say, I hear both sides, and this is kind of what I would recommend.
Yeah, but I really like your point of saying if you nurture the culture, then the peer group, the people working with a certain person should step in and say, hey, look, that might be a bit inappropriate. I think that's the best way to handle it. But if you're really at the point that you say, I as a community manager have to step in and really polish things because someone is really misbehaving that bad, then something went really wrong, because at that point you are on the line. You are the community manager that has to say you are out, which will bring your reputation down for at least part of the community that generally don't like this policing. So that is really hard, and I think at that point at least a body of people doing this helps, because it's not one person then that is like the bad guy, the bad cop. So I guess it's again the proactive behavior, and trying to get the culture right, and trying to get the peer groups together, that everyone is connected and everyone has other people that look after them, so the community can work as a whole somehow.
All right, great. Looks like we have one question left here. I do have another one from Twitter, but I don't think we have time. But question 7 is, has the time for open source passed?
Oh, we need another hour for that.
Sorry, this is all you get. You have 4 minutes. Go.
Can we all say together a big no, and that's it?
Yes, we can.
Sure, if you want to do that, we can go into the other question from Twitter.
Let's do that, because this is, I mean, come on, it's just starting, guys.
Yeah, exactly. It's more the other way around.
Exactly.
All right, I will warn you, the question from Twitter is a full hangout in itself as well, but We have a question here from Dom, and Dom was asking, what happens when you're too bogged down? So as part of the community growing pain, obviously you don't have time to answer every single question. Kind of how do you prioritize those?
Isn't that what an FAQ is for?
Well, obviously, you have to get a team together. You have to have helpers, like a community working group, someone to help you, volunteers, whatever, people you can trust, people that are known in the community that can take over at least part of community leadership roles in their area of work in the community. I think that would help, and they can answer questions that they can answer for that part, and I think that will help everyone.
I think it's also important as a community manager to be constantly evaluating yourself and learning where your limits are and when it's really time to find someone else to assist in different areas. It can be very easy to feel like you need to be involved in every conversation or need to be a part of every discussion, and you need to know where your personal limits are as a community manager so that you recognize before it happens that bogged down point, so to speak.
Good point.
I think it's also important to remember what it feels like when you ask a question and you don't get the answer because somebody's too busy. You know, that's really that can be really difficult if you're on the receiving end of that. So if you're getting to that point, then I guess it's our responsibility to realize that and, like David said, know your limitations and either find other ways of creatively dealing with that or find ways that you can make more time if you can yourself, but not to just not want to answer the question, I guess.
I think one of the most important keys to community management is that you're there to build teams, not do the work yourself. Yeah. That's the thing, right?
I sometimes say in the presentations, you know, the ideal situation would be that if I teach all of you to be community managers and I could go. That would be the ideal thing.
I like to see it not so much as being a manager as being an enabler. Yeah, my job is to make everyone else have a job and everyone else to feel like they're part of something and to be able to get involved.
But I think one important thing for a community manager is also to have a feeling for the community as a whole. I mean, the whole thing, how it feels, where some things are missing or going wrong. I think that's also something that the community manager, I mean, in the end, you will enable people to change this situation if you feel something is wrong, but still, I think it's an important thing for a community manager to have this feeling for their community.
Yeah, it's good that there is somebody that when you go to him or her and you say, look, how is it going, or what is the most important thing to do, or even probably more important, should we do X, Y, or Z, you know, that you can give answers to those questions. I've actually found that is almost easier than it should be because by simply having the role and the title, again, in my experience, you notice people start to actually tell you things they probably wouldn't have told you if you weren't community manager. And that helps you a lot in this job, right? If people see a problem, they come to you because they think that you're the guy supposed to solve it, which might be nonsense, right? If you want other people to do things themselves, as David just said. But hey, it's good that you know, right? This is, yeah. This helps me at least a lot, basically. It's also the expectations of the job that basically creates self-fulfilling prophecy. Obviously, this is something that happens in every job, but it's kind of curious, I think, in this role.
Sounds like a medium, someone connecting ghosts and other people together. Like they come to you and ask you.
With higher expectations. I mean, nobody expects you to actually say anything useful. But
indeed.
We have to solve every problem.
Yes, or connect to the people that can solve the problem.
Yes, at the very least, yeah, exactly.
All right, awesome. Thank you, guys. I know we could keep going and going and going like the Energizer Bunny, but we're out of time. It is 3:01. So thank you so much for joining us today. Next week, we'll be back talking about social change in community management and how to use communities to create social change, make the world a better place. So feel free to come back and join us then. We'd love to have you guys back anytime. And that's all we have. So happy Friday, everyone.